I'm here today with Eric Peters. It's August 10th, 2006, a little bit after 6 p.m. at the St. Stephen's Church. Would you state your name, please?
Joseph Eric Peters. I usually, on paper, go by J. Eric Peters, and one-on-one it's always Eric.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
Actually, a bit of a mix. One of my parents told me that we had some Native American Indian somewhere in our background. I never looked into that, but European American, German, Welsh, and a bit of Italian. And German. That's all I know.
And did you grow up in Ohio?
I did.
And where did you grow up at?
Belpre, Ohio. It's down on the Ohio River on the West Virginia border in Washington County, which has Marietta as the county seat, so it's down there. And
do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 2 stepsisters and 1 stepbrother.
All right. And what is your earliest memory in your childhood?
My earliest memory is either the smell, the aroma of candles or candle wax, or maybe it was the burning in church. Just up front they had candles, and I remember that scent. But it's kind of a vague memory. I know that's where it must have come from, but it seems like that's my first memory. But my first clear memory is of learning to read by watching Batman and having my mom come in and read like the fight scene words. That's how I started reading.
And did you attend elementary school in Belpre?
I did.
And what was the name of that school?
Belpre Elementary School.
Did you attend junior high school in Belpre as well?
I did. Belpre Middle School.
And did you graduate from high school there in Belpre then?
I did, Belpre High School.
When you were growing up, who were your heroes?
Batman and Richard M. Nixon and Chuck Colson.
And how old were you when you realized that you might be different than the other kids?
That was definitely in my awareness by my sophomore year in high school. It may have been there as early as 7th grade.
And when you say that was in your awareness, what do you mean? What?
I knew that I wasn't all that interested in girls, except for if there was some way I could be obnoxious about it, and that I had feelings for guys that I was really ashamed of and felt guilty about.
When you first started having these feelings, did you tell anyone about it?
Some clergy, 2 or 3 clergy over the years, either for prayer and spiritual counsel, or just to see if they knew some way for me to get rid of the feelings. But by my freshman year in high school, I was starting to hang out with somebody. Well, no, that was my sophomore year. Started to hang out with this guy named Alan, who was a really good friend to me. And I also spent some time. The first time anybody really came out to me as being gay was Chris, who was also went to school with us. He was a senior when I was a freshman.
When you were growing up, did you ever hear people talk about gay people, either in general or specific people?
I remember 2 things. I can remember sitting in, not my dad's recliner, but my mom's chair in our living room in Belpre, reading the Parkersburg Sentinel, and reading something about the Episcopal Church, saying something about gay people should have civil rights too. And I was thrilled and immediately ashamed of feeling that. I can also remember a couple of boys in high school who had really hard times, and I was a part of giving them hard times. The other way I heard about gay sexuality was there are books that are kind of like, it's supposed to be like for character building, or this is what adolescence is like, or your teen years are like if you're a Christian. And at that time, I can remember that some of those books had references to gay sexuality.
When you were growing up prior to being 18, did you know anyone else who was gay?
I knew that Alan either was or was uncertain, and my own conceptual framework was such that even if it had been obvious to other people, it wasn't obvious to me at the time. He was a good friend of mine. And he and I talked about having those feelings. Not for each other, but blah, blah, blah.
After you turned 18 and graduated from high school, what happened next? What did you do with your life next?
I left Belpre with a 1980 population of 8,000. By 1990, it shrunk to 6,000. It lost 25% of its population in 10 years. I moved in 1 week, really 1 day, from there to Dallas, Texas, to attend a Neo-Pentecostal Bible college in Dallas.
And what was the name of that college?
Christ for the Nations Institute.
And what was that like?
They were a very difficult 2 years. Lots of emotional crap going on, churning around, between being aware of having attraction to other guys, finding other guys attractive, hot, whatever, and feeling really guilty about that, and then feeling really guilty and ashamed that I wasn't practicing, call them spiritual disciplines, enough to get rid of those feelings, because if I had prayed the right way, and had been living the right way, and had been reading the Bible enough, and had been doing all these other things enough, it would change. And there was never, this is the recipe. It's always just do more of this. If you were doing enough of this, then this would change. It didn't happen. It was a mess.
And you spent 2 years there?
I did.
And at what point did you leave?
I graduated, and after my second year, I went on a mission trip to Jamaica in the West Indies, and then went back home to live with my parents.
What happened after you moved back home after you graduated?
I can remember the month of August in 1982 as being just really difficult with all the religious stuff and spiritual stuff and the guilt about my sexuality, dealing with my mom, and just having like the normal kind of friction that people have when they live together, especially when an adult returns home with the parents. And that was a mess too. And then I went to started school at Parkersburg Community College.
When you were in Dallas, what did you study there?
They really only had one program. First of all, it was unaccredited, which was insignificant to me at the time. But a class in Romans, a class in Deliverance, a class in New Testament, a class in Old Testament.
Was this in preparation to be a minister?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That was the idea.
All right, I understand. And when you came back and went to Parkersburg Community College, what were you studying there?
General studies, I hadn't really decided yet.
All right. How long did you attend there?
4 semesters, so 2 years is what I got credit for.
And what happened next?
My fourth, during the summer, when I was 21, I took a summer quarter at Ohio University, and the difficulties between me and my mother had just continued and continued. And so when I was in Athens, it was really great because I didn't have to be around them. But I went to an Army recruiter and took the test and got a very nice offer and went into what they call a delayed entry program to go on active duty in February of '84. February of '84 was a month and a half into my 4th semester. So what I did was I took a lot of, I think I took like 4 classes. I don't remember if I just dropped one or what, but 2 of them were independent study.
What branch of the military did you enter into?
Army.
And where were you stationed at?
Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic, then Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, just outside of Indianapolis, for what's called AIT, or Advanced Individualized Training. Actually, I think that base has been closed. I think it was closed in the 90s. And went from there to Fort Benning, Georgia for airborne school, paratrooper training. And dropped out my first week because I just wasn't putting up anymore. And was based at Fort Benning for a year and a half. Went with a combat engineering battalion to Honduras. I'm pretty sure that was like the summer of '85. And I'm pretty sure that at that point, things under Reagan had gotten kind of hot between the Sandinistas and Nicaragua and El Salvador. Honduras, I think, abuts one of those countries. I'm not exactly sure, but that's what that was about. And then, while I was there, I submitted a request for a transfer to Europe, and I got it. And I was assigned to 5th Corps headquarters, which I was excited about because it was a big city in Europe, and it was like a kind of a prestigious assignment, except they put me on what's called detachment to a JAG office that they ran like 2 hours outside of Frankfurt. And the whole time at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, I trained to be a legal clerk / legal specialist. Practiced that, did that job at Fort Benning and in Honduras and in Germany. Toward the end, about 6 months or so, before one incident, all the legal clerks who were in my pay grade had to take a skills test, a skills qualifier test or something like that. And I got the 3rd highest score on it in all of 5th Corps, which was a nice achievement. And went on leave to come back to Columbus, Georgia, and Fort Benning, mainly because a guy that I had dated very briefly, and I had struck up a correspondence, and he was sounding like he wanted to actually just, put a relationship together or whatever. And also it was kind of a lark. But I came back and I found out that he and my best friend from Columbus, Georgia, my impression was that they were heavily into cocaine and steroids. I went back to Germany. I had been flirting with somebody before I left for Georgia. And when I got back to Germany, I called him, and I went to visit him at his base in Germany. And when I ran into him there, he was with a friend of his. And the 3 of us decided that we were going to go to, I forget if it was Tony or the other guy, go to their room in the barracks and fool around. And so we did. And the CQ, charge of quarters, guard duty, whatever, came to the room and knocked on the door, and we all tried to hide. But rooms in barracks they're not like a Gomer Pyle style layout, like an open bay, but the rooms are pretty small. I mean, I think the room was smaller than this. And we got caught. My battalion commander, who was stationed in Frankfurt, and whom I had never met, and who had never met me, tried to give me a general discharge under honorable conditions, which is second best out of 5 possibilities. It's not a dishonorable discharge, it's not a bad conduct discharge, it's not a general other than honorable conditions discharge, but it's not fully honorable either. I decided to fight. I put together, I think 20, 30 character statements from different people that I was stationed with. Asked for a hearing by a board of officers, which they had to grant legally, and had 2 lieutenant colonels, one a Roman Catholic priest, and the other one the deputy community commander where I was stationed, testify for me at the hearing. It came back exactly what I had wanted it to. Came back with, yeah, okay, you did this and you're out, but we're going to give you an honorable discharge. And I was quite pleased. Several years later, Clinton got elected, and the day after he got elected, I called a local recruiter and said, okay, I got kicked out for being gay, now you have to let me back in. And that didn't work. I can remember making that phone call.
The first time that you've mentioned in our conversation today a relationship or an experience with another man was when you were in the military. Is that the first place that you explored a relationship with another man?
Yes.
All right. Tell me about your coming out experience.
It was pretty much the military. I had been involved in high school theater, and there was a base theater in Fort Benning, and so I decided to see about getting involved there, and met the set director. I forget what the title is, but he had a party at his trailer, actually, in Georgia. And I noticed that he had a copy of the Episcopal Prayer Book. And he and I got to talking about it, and I told him that I was checking out this Episcopal church with the idea of converting, if you will. And he invited me back for another, one-on-one conversation, and we wound up having sex. I'm sure I asked him to. He introduced me to somebody who was in my barracks. We fooled around, and it was like, oh wow, this is cool. And as soon as I did that, I knew, and I was pretty much satisfied, and I accepted that I was gay and that gay was okay. As far as coming out publicly or politically, that really happened when I was fighting the discharge. When I came out, I went to the University of Cincinnati.
When you came out of the military, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got kicked out, and less than a week later, I was in school at the University of Cincinnati, and I immediately joined like the Gay Lesbian Alliance or whatever it was called at the time. At one point, wrote a letter to the editor of the Cincinnati Enquirer, or maybe it was the school newspaper, and came out. Said that I was gay, I was in the military, and they should change the policy. Pretty much lost me a job that I had. I was very naive. I was incredibly naive. With a congressman. I was working in the congressman's local office as like an aide. I'm pretty sure I got that because I had just come out of the military, and I was had something of a legal background and wanted the job. But right after that, I got iced out. That was my coming out experience.
How long were you at the University of Cincinnati?
3 years. It took me 2 years. I transferred with credits from Parkersburg Community College, and took another 2 years to finish a Bachelor's of Arts in with high honors in sociology. And then did my first year of graduate school there. Right after I started graduate school that year, I was thinking, it was too easy to get in, and they gave me a fellowship, and I don't really want to be in Cincinnati, and I'll bet some other school would take me and give me a deal too. So I started looking into that, and after my first year, transferred to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
And what were you studying at the graduate level?
Sociology, and at Minnesota, I also took some social work courses.
And how long were you in Minnesota?
3 years.
And that was to complete your graduate degree?
I never finished. I ran into some health problems in my second year, in the late fall, like October, November of my second year, and by the end of winter quarter, I was severely depressed, and my psychiatrist, after 2 suicide attempts, my psychiatrist put me in the hospital where I spent 3 weeks.
Where did you go after Minnesota?
Frankly, I was lost for a while. Doing temp jobs, barely hanging on, and that wasn't working. There wasn't enough work, there wasn't enough money. So I moved back in with my parents, who had moved to Cleveland by that point. I did quite a bit of job searching in Minneapolis and in Cleveland. Got some interviews. Finally got a job with the state of Ohio, which allowed me to move to Columbus.
What year was that you moved to Columbus?
93.
All right.
And worked for 2 years, and just after the end of the second year, my boss basically asked me, how come you're not doing the job? And they sent me to a doctor and neuropsychologist to find out if the bipolar disorder that I had disclosed to them, to find out if that was the reason, and it came back that yes, that was the reason. The reason I wasn't doing the job was because I couldn't do the job, and I wound up getting a disability, an involuntary disability separation, and then retired on disability, which is where I am now.
When you moved to Columbus, did you become involved in gay issues and causes?
What I can remember doing in 1993 was I signed up on payroll deduction to give money to Stonewall Columbus. I think it may have been Stonewall Union at that point, I'm not sure. And I think also some money to the Columbus AIDS Task Force, and I think there was a third organization I donated to. I got active with a group over at the Newman Center. It was a gay men support group or something.
Did you participate in any social activities that were a part of the gay community?
I don't think I did at all at that point, other than the support group, and I started going to Drummers, which is a gay AA group. I don't remember developing that much of a social life at that point.
Did you participate or attend any of the bars or?
Oh, sure. I went out to the Garage. I went out to Trade Winds, Eagle.
Were those basically the bars at that point in time?
I think there were some others. I think that I'm sure there were others. I started going out to gay bars when I was in Fort Benning. There was 1 or 2 bars just off base, 1 or 2 gay bars in the city, Columbus off base, and also did a lot of weekend trips to Atlanta. I went over to Germany. There were gay bars in Frankfurt, Cincinnati, Minneapolis, here in Columbus. Yeah, I was going to a lot of gay bars. I was going to way too many gay bars.
So what motivated you to get more involved with local politics and gay issues?
I think that there is a definite correlation between my mental health and my involvement with the gay community. I'm not sure of what extent, if any, involvement. No, it does. I'm sure it does. But between 1995 and 2001, I started getting more politically active. I started getting some of my health back, some of my mental health back, until 2002. I started getting more and more active. Since then, have I think done quite a bit.
And what have those activities been?
Let's see. First thing I did was write a letter to the editor of the other paper about domestic partner benefits in October 2002. And then I was so thrilled to see that they actually printed it that I wrote them another one in mid-November of 2002, slamming a candidate who had just lost, Dave Dobos, for being the kind of fundamentalist evangelical Christian that I used to be. I didn't say that exactly. But from that I was like, well, maybe I should learn more about stuff. I was also seeing a shrink, Howard Fratkin, at Affirmations, whose name ought to be coming up in some more interviews, because he and his business partner, Don Roethlisberger, have been, in my opinion, real pillars of the community, between their work with AIDS, people with AIDS, and their work at Affirmations and some other stuff that they've done. I think Howard actually may have suggested that I contact Stonewall to see about volunteering, or maybe it was from something that I heard in an AA meeting that you need to be doing service work to help other people. That's one of the ways you stay sober. That's one of the ways you get recovery. You get some health back, some serenity, some spiritual peace. But I started there, and everybody goes in and out of Stonewall. I mean, that's really where I started meeting people. I volunteered for Pride one year, heard about it and signed up, whatever. And in the week leading up to it, which I think was either 2003 or 2004, Joyce something, who is another real leader in the community, and I were in the computer room, the library at Stonewall for some reason, and somehow I brought up news that the U.S. Supreme Court had found 6-3 that sodomy laws were unconstitutional. And she got excited, I got excited. She explained to me that the 6-3 meant that it wasn't going to get overturned, that it was pretty much set. At that point, I had developed a habit, a custom, whatever, of speaking at city council meetings, because I discovered that there are TV cameras there, and that if you give a comment on legislation or whatever, they put that on TV, and you can pretty much start with what they want you to talk about and say something about anything you want to, and that became a real game for me. I had quite a bit of fun with that. But having that custom, having that familiarity, I thought this was really funny. The following Monday there was a council meeting, and I forget how I snuck it in there, but I said, Strom Thurmond thought that sodomy laws were to die for, and that's just what he did. One of the things about being mentally ill is that it frees me to do some creative stuff that other people might consider too weird, too on the margins, too out of the ordinary, too beyond routine to try. And an example of that creativity is, I'm thinking it was 2004. That might be wrong. I was on the computer at Stonewall, and it was right after the Lawrence and Gardner versus Texas decision came down. And I started doing research through Lambda Legal and through National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and through Human Rights Campaign, and found that there were like 20 or 30 religious groups that had filed amicus briefs, amicus curiae briefs, friend of the court briefs, as a part of Lawrence and Garner versus Texas. And I was like, I never hear about that. And I never read about that in the gay press. I don't read too much about religion in the gay press. But then I started doing some more research, and I found out that pretty much these same religious bodies, same religious groups, had supported us in trying to get the Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed under Clinton. And I was, and I also was familiar with the Shepherd Initiative because I went to they did one conference here. I think it was in one of the hotels downtown. That was just really excellent, very inspirational. It still stays with me somewhat. But I was concerned. I was troubled by the exclusion of anybody. I mean, I've been sort of excluded most of my life, or felt excluded, or felt on the outside. And they didn't have any Jewish groups. No synagogues as a part of the Shepherd Initiative. I knew there was a humanist organization in town that did some stuff for us. They weren't included. And I wanted to see about doing something more inclusive. And I also wanted to see something that would be more at the center of the community. So I went to Stonewall and talked to, I think you were president of the board at that time, and Kelly Pinkleton, who was volunteer coordinator, center coordinator, whatever, and said, how about we do this? And I got to be a bit persistent, and finally we got into the planning stage, and we wound up having the event. I have no doubt that prior to that, Kate Anderson, who was then the executive director of Stonewall, had been talking with Reverend Phil Hart, who spoke at an ecumenical service during Pride at First Congregational in 2001, 2002, something like that, that they had talked about him coming on board as chaplain or doing something like this. So there was, although I didn't know about that, looking back on it now and looking at the facts as they are, I'm thinking that there was more general movement toward the gay community doing more with our religious allies, leading up now to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force merged with the Institute for Welcoming Resources or something, some religious organization. And the Human Rights Campaign hired a full-time, pretty much a minister, like a religious advisor or something. I don't know what his title is. Harry Knox. Let's see. On the way there, between sitting at the computer and finding out about the amicus briefs from our religious allies and seeing that this stuff happened with the task force with HRC, we put together a directory of supportive religious congregations. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to be a part of it. I am also really grateful that we wound up with an ordained minister, Phil Hart or not, whoever it was, George Glazier, one of my favorite people in the world, my priest. If he could have done it, anybody could have done that. But having an ordained minister in that position connected with Stonewall is, I think, an incredibly important, an incredibly significant relationship. It says over and over again that not all Christians feed into anti-gay hate, and it reminds people that religion playing its function in our culture, its function in society of bringing people together and excluding some people, always. It's always a part of it. Totem and taboo, I think, is what I think the book that Sigmund Freud said that in. Emil Durkheim said something very similar in the Elementary Forms of Religious Life. And that's what we're seeing happening, is religion starting to bond the gay community with the parts of society that are very supportive. It's playing that role, I think. It's saying that we're legitimate, that our work for equality is legitimate. And the involvement of churches and synagogues has, I think, just incredible cultural significance. The other thing that I wanted to say was, when I started on the thing about speaking at City Council, was, and I made some copies of these articles. Okay. An article in the Columbus Dispatch, Tuesday, July 8th, 2003, titled Foes of Broader Health Benefits Address Council. This is more flattering than the other papers, but it says, Joseph Eric Peters, who is gay. The next week I read this to City Council and I go, Eric Peters, who is gay, I am! Got some laughs out of it. Spoke in favor of expanded benefits last night and said Columbus should be a real city, like Atlanta, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago, which provide expanded benefits. Please do the right thing, he said, you're Democrats. That was the Columbus Dispatch's piece on it. The other papers said, remembering the Dispatch said that by name, I was the only person to speak in favor of domestic partner benefits. In the other paper, Kristen Convery said, the one public allusion to Jesus came from a gay man who angrily accused the anti-domestic partners clan of being, quote, Bible-banging Jesus Nazis, unquote. He was the only person at the meeting who encouraged council to offer domestic partner benefits. The stuff in this media doesn't say is, that day I went to City Hall to sign up to speak again. It was kind of a hobby for me. I saw Jay Mina, who I recognized from the media, and some other individual in a suit who somehow I just had the impression that he was a minister. And I was like, holy shit, something's coming down. And they're up to something. And they were at the same counter where I was. And I'm pretty sure I said something rude to Mina. I don't remember what it was. But that'd be very much in character for me. They were there at the counter where you signed up, and that's what you do at that counter. So I sent an email to somebody at Stonewall. My fantasy was that we'd have a couple hundred angry gay and lesbian people and our supporters down there to start a riot against those people. Well, not only did that not happen, but I was the only person there that week, which actually may not have been such a bad thing. I knew from sitting in the gallery with these people, and frankly, any reporter should have picked up on this too. A large proportion of these people were not from Columbus, but they were showing up as Columbus City Council because that's the kind of presumptuous, arrogant people that they are, to speak out against this. And there were a lot of Bibles there. People were carrying them, somebody would be carrying one, somebody else would be carrying another one, and it was their Bibles. It wasn't just a random crowd. It was definitely a religious crowd. And I sat there in the gallery and absolutely harassed the living hell out of them. If I had an opportunity to do the same thing again, I would do the same thing again. And one of the things that comes to my mind is, in the Gospels, Jesus goes into the temple and finds out that there were basically some con artists there. They're called money changers usually. But that's basically what they were, was con artists. He threw them out of the temple. I'm not throwing these people out of the temple. I'm just trying to encourage them to leave the political arena, or to lose in the political arena. I think that rhetoric, words, style are important in activism because they convey a message. And if you treat people like them as if they can be belittled, as if they can be diminished, I think it tends to do that. That's what I was doing that night. And the other thing is, they may preach the same names that I would use in church. I talked about Batman earlier. The Batman of the 1960s was Adam West in a costume. The Adam West of the 1980s was pretty much somebody in a cartoon. If you go to a comic book store and look at the whole shelf filled with Batman comics, there are at least 5 or 6 different versions of Batman. but every single one of them is called Batman. Maybe Batman the Dark Knight, Batman the Avenger, or whatever, but they are variations on the same person. They're using the same name, but my opinion, my belief is that when they do, they blaspheme. So I don't have any problem blaspheming back the people that they're describing. When they say God, when they say Jesus, I think they mean a blasphemous caricature of God and Jesus. And I will attack that caricature. That's the style, that's the strategy that I've been following for a while. But that's who was there. That's who was there. And then the next week, Suzanne Hohelick, who always covered city council, says in an article, Tuesday, July 15th, domestic partners benefits get support, that Leslie Fine spoke there and that Kate Anderson spoke there. But I'm pretty sure you and I both remember a third person who spoke there that night, which was Rod Berger, president of Stonewall's board. And I tailed on right after that. And I tried to start talking about domestic partnership benefits. Matt Habash said, no way. He said, it had already been discussed by 3 people. Choose something else. And I paused for a second, and ding, that creativity again came up with the idea of, see, bullshit is creative. It's a form of creativity. I said to him, how about education? Let's have an educational debate about domestic partner benefits. And then I attacked Jamie again. I was amused. Let's see. And then after Kristen Convery wrote the thing, Domestic Partners' Worst Nightmare, what I honestly think may be one of the best things in 4 paragraphs that I've ever written, because it's dense, it's rich. For instance, this sentence. First,
why don't you read the whole thing?
Okay. I raged maniacally. Kristen Convery's article rocked. Domestic Partners' Worst Nightmare, July 10. My only criticisms. First, she failed to name the Lone Ranger hero, quote, the only person at the meeting who encouraged council to offer domestic partners benefits, unquote. Who was this courageous paladin, this bold white knight in brilliantly shining armor, who, like Batman and Daredevil, fought the good fight alone? Come on, say my name! No, I'll get back to that. Second, a slight inaccuracy mars her report. I did not, quote, angrily accuse the anti-domestic partners claim of being, quote, Bible-banging Jesus Nazis, double unquote. Rather, I raged maniacally and then repeatedly, at least 3 times I hope, gestured to the pathetic little band of Bible-banging bigots in the peanut gallery, calling them by my bon mot, and iced their cake by calling them scum. Please, Kristen, accuracy counts. I really do. I think that may be one of the best things I've ever written. I've said it before, and actually I think I might really believe it, that night, standing in City Council's hall, packed with those fundamentalist scum, that may have been the proudest night of my life so far. But then again, the work that I did with the Interfaith Forum, standing on that stage, when I can remember saying in my brief comments, all the comments were brief, basically, the Episcopal Church had elevated the first openly gay bishop in Christendom. I don't remember if there was a standing ovation in response to that, but I think it came awfully close. That moment is pretty high up there too, but it's tainted by something. And that is one of the primary limitations for my disability is an inability to, and actually I see this changing, and I'm ecstatic about that, but I have had a lot of difficulty functioning in committees without going off, without saying something inappropriate, rude, telling a joke that I'm the only one who gets and it doesn't work in the committee. And I know that I can remember that was a part of my work with that committee. And in my mind, my memory of that is tainted because the job deserved more than that. And one of the results, I think, is the directory that we have that hasn't been updated since then, as far as, no, it hasn't been, had probably 1/4 of the congregations who belonged in it. If I had found a different way to sell it, if I had found a different way to communicate the idea, if I had really made it clear that there was what it was about them that made us want them in that directory, we would have had one 4 times as large. And the directory could have been a much better tool for community organizing around religious themes ever since then.